Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday morning service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. We are so glad you are part of our community this morning. My name is Judith Genya, and I am your service leader today. No matter where you come from, and regardless of your religious tradition or none, your race, culture, gender identity, or sexual orientation, you are all welcome here. In our UU fellowship, you can bring your whole self, your questioning mind, and your expansive heart to share in fellowship, reflection, and great music. It is my privilege to tell you about our guest minister today, the Reverend Amanda Poppei. She's been here before, a couple of years ago, and last week. So many of us are familiar with Reverend Poppei. Reverend Poppei is the newly appointed senior minister of the Universalist Unitarian Church of Arlington, West Virginia. Oh, no, regular Virginia, sorry. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Religious Studies from Yale University and a Master of Divinity degree from Wesley Theological Seminary. She has served in leadership positions with the Chesapeake UU Ministers Association, the UU Humanist Association, the National Leadership Council of the American Ethical Union, and the Washington Interfaith Network. She is also a member of the UUA's Ministerial Fellowship Committee. We begin our service by lighting our chalice, a symbol of our UU denomination. Reverend Mark Johanningsmeyer will light the chalice for us this morning.
If you have never before visited this planet, and if you arrived in the darkest hours of the night, you could not possibly imagine how darkness breaks up, how the mystery and color of a new day arrives. For light, even the tiniest spark is powerful, and yet it is also incredibly generous and gentle. Dawn is the ultimate surprise. As we light this little flame, we're grateful for light, any and all light that enters our universe and our lives and our hearts and minds. These are words from Anam Cara, written by Irish writer John O'Donoghue.
I always loved Greek mythology, and when I was 20, I got the opportunity to visit Knossos, Crete. I was hoping to experience the labyrinth described in the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. I wished, like Theseus, that someone would hand me a thread to guide my way back out of the labyrinth. But I was so disappointed to learn that the labyrinth at Minos's palace at Knossos does not exist. The concept of a labyrinth as an ancient symbol for inner growth and healing has existed for millennia and continues as a tool for inner exploration and spiritual growth. Unlike a maze, there's no trick to get in and out of a labyrinth. If you enter with an open heart, you can reach its center, and then you can find your way back. Today, I invite you to enter this gathering with an open heart and mind. Reverend Poppei will lead us deeper into the world of labyrinths because there are many paths to explore in this life. Now, please join in singing hymn number 1003, Where Do We Come From? The words will appear on your screen.
Where do we come from? What are we? and welcome everyone to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. I'm Dan Newspiel, the president of your fellowship. Now, a few announcements. Is this your first time joining us? If so, please contact Chris Chase at the email in your chat box to learn more about our fellowship. Are you interested in joining one of our Zoom discussion groups? You can read further details about them at the bottom of the order of service that you received by email. For more information about these groups, contact Diana Amaya at the email in the chat box. We welcome your feedback on this service. If you have any, please contact Kathy Canepa at the email in the chat box. Our Zoom breakout room discussions after the service are great places to reflect on this service and to meet old and new friends. If you want to participate, please just stay connected and you'll be randomly assigned to a breakout room immediately at the end of the postlude music. Be sure to accept your room assignment on Zoom. If you're in a room with only 1 or 2 members, stay put a few more minutes and I'll reassign you to a larger group. The rooms will stay open at least 20 minutes. I'll post a question at the end of the service that was provided, and that may kick off your discussion. After the breakout session ends, those interested may return to the larger group to continue chatting. Choosing this fellowship as your spiritual home is an important commitment. After carefully deciding if UUFSMA is right for you, we welcome you to become an official member by completing a membership form available at our website and making a financial commitment to the fellowship that reflects your financial means and spirit of generosity. There's more information at our website listed in the chat box. Now, a brief message from our COVID-19 task force, whose members are physicians, nurses, social workers, and care team members with many years of experience pertinent to this pandemic. We recognize that despite the continuous rise of cases of COVID-19 in San Miguel, many of our members and friends have chosen some behaviors that increase their risk of exposure to infection, such as going to restaurants or entertaining guests in our homes. After months of seclusion, the motivation for this risk-taking is understandable. But the risks are real, and we've learned of people who believed that they were being safe but still became infected during one of these risky situations. So I want to discuss how our UU principles can help bolster public health recommendations to prevent coronavirus infections. First, since we know we may be contagious before showing signs of infection, we wear masks and adhere to physical distancing because we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So we strive to protect others as well as ourselves. We advocate these recommendations and explain them to others in a loving way because we believe in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. As I explained in more detail in my message 2 months ago, we believe in the value of public health guidance based on scientific evidence because we support a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And perhaps most importantly, we know that we are all in this together since we respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So please continue to be safe, avoid indoor gatherings, and maintain at least 6 feet separation when interacting with anyone outside of your immediate sheltering unit. It's the UU thing to do. Now, please join Kathy and I in reciting our spoken covenant, which should appear on your screen. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
Good morning. It's good to be with you again this morning by way of Zoom. I am the Reverend Tom Rossiello, and I'm the minister of this fellowship. I'd like you now to enter with me into a very sacred time in our service. It's a time when members and friends of this fellowship share significant joys, sorrows, and concerns with their community. If you should have a joy, sorrow, and concern that you would like me to share in a future service, please be sure to email it to me. And if there's something that you would like to share this morning and have not emailed it to me in advance, you may share it now in the chat column where others can read it. When we express our joys, sorrows, or concerns, we light a candle. We do so to indicate that that thought, that person, that prayer is with us in community this morning. I now turn to our candles and we will express our joys, sorrows, and concerns. Our first candle is one from Linda Soren, and it expresses a sorrow. Linda writes, "This week San Miguel lost one of its treasures, Agnes Olive. Agnes radiated joy wherever she went. She was truly a being of light, a talented artist, a world traveler, a lover of nature, a dancer, a writer, a friend, a mother, an inspiration to all who knew her with her quiet grace and infinite kindness. Rest in peace, dear Agnes." Several of you wrote to share that another member of our community closely connected with this fellowship, Charles Rutherford, died this week after a long illness. Charlie was a longtime San Miguel resident and partner to Judy McKay. Friends remember him as an avid golfer, tennis player, and a croquet and bridge playing maven. He was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. One person shared, "Charles was the very essence of a gentleman, and he died as gracefully as he had lived." One of the gifts we bring each other is comfort and support in times of loss. If you know Judy, I would encourage you to send her an email expressing your condolences, and her email will now appear in the chat. This week, many of you expressed concerns about the fairness of the voting process in the United States, and in particular, voter suppression efforts, a lack of attention to foreign interference in elections, false allegations that mail-in voting will result in massive fraud, and most of all this week, many of you expressed great concern for the blatant efforts to damage the postal system in ways that could cause great problems with mail-in votes being counted at the very time when mail-in voting is critical to keep people safe. This candle is for fair, free, easily accessible, and safe voting. It's also a reminder that the use of the democratic process is one of the principles we as Unitarian Universalists affirm and promote. Several of you wrote to express a joy that for the first time, a woman of color is a candidate for the vice presidency of the United States, and of the hope that this is another step towards racial equality. As always, the struggle with both the COVID disease, the lives lost, the emotional struggle that isolation and keeping safe weighs heavily upon us is still here. This is a candle of memory for those lost, healing for those ill, hope for new treatments and vaccines, and encouragement for all of us to continue to keep safe and healthy. Several of you wish to express the joy that you are experiencing in this fellowship, even in this time when we cannot see each other in person. The joy is not just the maintaining, but the deepening of our connections to each other. So this is a candle for the creation and the ongoing sustaining and deepening of beloved community. Another related candle of joy, several folks from all over really have joined our fellowship since we have been worshiping virtually. In the not too distant future, we hope to welcome and introduce them individually. But right now, this is just a candle of joy expressing how glad we are to have you as members of our congregation, and one of encouragement to all of us to be sure and connect with these new folks in breakout rooms and other Zoom events during the week. Finally, we light a candle for the joys, sorrows, and concerns that you've typed into the chat this morning, and for all those that are held deep in your hearts but remain unspoken. I now invite you into a time of prayer, meditation, or reflection, today guided by music. Music is critical to our spiritual life. Music can express things when words alone fail, and often leads us to a deeper place. We enter into this time with words about music from 20th century Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams. He writes, with a special sense of intimacy and inwardness, music redefines, illumines, refreshes, and orders our experience. It is not an escape from reality. It is rather the discovery of a center of meaning and power, of a center that is a symptom and a sign of faith, ultimately not a human achievement, but a gift of grace.
As a UU Fellowship, we are self-supporting and rely on contributions from members, friends, and visitors to sustain our work. Information about how to make your donation is in the chat box, and we urge you to be generous. When you donate, you can specify if you want your donation to go toward your pledge or to our minister's discretionary fund. Just indicate this in the notes section of your donation. Otherwise, it'll be credited to our general fund, which will help meet the expenses of the fellowship, including this service, as well as the annual grants we make to 11 carefully chosen community organizations. 50% of the fellowship's income goes to our grant fund. We are so fortunate to gather today to nourish our spirits and count our blessings in what for us is a chosen paradise. 60% of San Miguelienses, however, are living below the poverty line, and a third of them are children who suffer from constant malnutrition. One local organization that UUFSMA supports has taken the lead on providing food for these children. You know them by their mission, Feed the Hungry. Our grant to Feed the Hungry is used almost entirely to produce ingredients for 20,000 nutritious meals at the cost of about 10 cents per meal. Today, because of COVID, they are purchasing food for 20,000 families 7 days a week, more than 5 times what they had planned. Their monthly food costs have risen from $50,000 per month for the school lunch program to $130,000 a month for the emergency Feed the Families program, almost 3 times the usual amount. And the children and families they now feed include clients of 7 nonprofits and the residents of 9 colonias. If schools reopen during the pandemic, their food costs will rise to more than $150,000 every month as they continue with both their school lunch program and their emergency family food program. Feed the Hungry relies almost entirely on private donations. Please give generously so that Feed the Hungry can continue their work on behalf of the neediest children of families of San Miguel. Thank you so much.
Paula, thank you so much for that. It is raining lightly here where I am outside Washington, D.C. And so it just was the perfect weather for the Downton Abbey music. Just creating this, oh, it feels a little magical right here for me. Before my sermon, I'd like to share a reading. This is from Rabindranath Tagore, who was a 19th and early 20th century Bengali poet, novelist, educator, philosopher. Tagore is often considered the greatest writer in modern Indian literature. And this poem is called Journey Home. The time that my journey takes is long, and the way of it long. I came out on the chariot of the first gleam of light and pursued my voyage through the wildernesses of worlds, leaving my track on many a star and planet. It is the most distant course that comes nearest to thyself. And that training is the most intricate, which leads to the utter simplicity of a tune. The traveler has to knock at every alien door to come to his own. And one has to wander through all the outer worlds to reach the innermost shrine at the end. My eyes strayed far and wide before I shut them and said, "Here art thou." The question and the cry, "Oh, where?" melt into tears of 1,000 streams and deluge the world with the flood of the assurance, I am. I am a collector of stories and a reader of books. I always have at least one novel going at any given time. And I really like stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, a good arc to the story. We know from school that that's how stories are supposed to go, right? Beginning and middle and end. And the books that I particularly like are the ones that wrap everything up neatly in a bow by the end of the story. I actually tend to like books about vampires and werewolves and all of that, but always by the end, the vampire has married the werewolf or somebody's married the right person, and all is well with the world. I imagine that this is exactly like your experience of real life. Perhaps minus the vampires and the werewolves, and actually, as it turns out, minus the bow at the end and the wrapping up, and possibly minus the clear story arc. On one hand, our lives do, in fact, have a beginning and a middle and an end. I was moved this morning as I heard you talk about and share in the chat memories of those you have lost, those whose lives you honor and remember, whose lives you will tell stories about and wear hats for, lives that have come to their end. The longest lives and even the very shortest lives. They have, like all stories, a beginning and a middle and an end. The thing is that in real life, we don't actually know which part we're in. We can't check and see how many pages are left or what percentage we've read to in our Kindle, and therefore make a guess about whether we're still in character development or whether really we're probably at the time of resolving the loose threads. We don't know where we are in that story of our lives, but still, we have a beginning and a middle and an end. Or really, perhaps, we have a lot of beginnings and middles and ends, all wrapped up inside the big arc that is our lives. Because that's the other thing about real life versus stories, and the reason that I always grab novels with a clean story arc and a bow at the end of them. In real life, things are rarely a clean story arc, rarely a straight line. I don't know about you, but I have never found in my life that life goes just exactly the way I think it should, better and better all the time, or perhaps after I've had a dip, it's sure to go right up again. Instead, my life, if you graphed it, would look like a down and an up and an unexpected fall, and then a whole bunch of jaggy things that I really can't make any sense of, and then some swoops here and there. As someone who loves stories and their bows at the end, I find this deeply frustrating. Why can't my life just follow the arcs that I like to read about? So I want to offer some metaphors today for how we might imagine our lives, how we might understand them as they unfold before us, the path that we find ourselves on, even and especially because we do not know which part of the path we are on at any given time. I have 3 metaphors I want to share with you this morning. The first, maybe, is my favorite, and I'll be curious to hear from you later which one resonates most today. The first metaphor is life as a spiral. You know, a spiral, either one that goes in like this or circles out like that, circling around and around, ever moving toward the center or ever expanding outward, whichever one of those works best for you. Doesn't matter to me. The metaphor of a spiral is particularly helpful to me when I feel like life is not a steady line up or forward, but rather that I'm in a huge downward dip, or even worse, when I feel as though I'm going backward in life. When it feels as though life is somehow stuck on repeat, like a record with a scratch where I'm back again at the same tune over and over. Perhaps you have had this experience. Perhaps, like me, you have had the experience of thinking you have settled finally something in your life, maybe through years of expensive therapy or your own inner work. You think, I have figured this out now. Now I am past this thing in my life and ready to move forward. And then, lo and behold, the thing arrives again, back in your life, and you think some version of, not this damn thing again, I thought I dealt with this already. These are the moments for spirals. The thing about a spiral is that although it is a circle of kinds, coming back to that same skip in the record, the spiral moves just a bit each time you go around. And so when we are caught in those places, I thought I figured out how to be a good friend, and now I wonder again. I thought I knew how to keep challenging people out of my life, but here I am back again. I thought I had gotten through the worst of this grief, and yet I am back in it. When this thing shows up yet again in our lives, we can imagine that though we are back again where we were before, we are in just a slightly different place. We are changed this time around. And so perhaps as we encounter the same damn thing again, we find that we are able to encounter it differently, with more capacity or new perspective. We have done this work before, we can do it again. And sometimes because of our changes, the thing itself is different too. I talk sometimes about the importance of really being able to feel our emotions, to feel them fully, to hold them, but not to allow them to hold us, if that makes sense, not to allow them to catch us, to keep us caught. Spirals can do that for us. Give us a chance to come back to the loss or the grief or the anger with a little more capacity this time to hold it ourselves. Spirals also, for me, give a chance to try again at mistakes I have made. Unitarian Universalism does not have a particularly strong theology of atonement. We don't offer ways to absolve people of the mistakes that they have made. And although there are things I love about that, I think it can be harder to admit our own mistakes if we don't have a way to let them go, to be forgiven. The spiral invites us to know that though we've made a mistake, we will likely have the chance to come back to it again later, to have a do-over of sorts, to know that we don't have to be perfect the first time. Spirals, too, are found all through the world, in the smallest little microcosms of bacteria and in the largest nebulae in our universe. Over and over again, the repeated pattern invites us in, centering down and drawing closer or expanding out. Sometimes, though, life feels not like a spiral, a chance to try again, following a pattern of motion. Sometimes, when life is particularly rough, it can feel instead like a maze, as though we are trapped, unclear how to get out. Every time we walk or turn, we come up against a wall, a double back. We aren't sure of the way forward. That's metaphor number 2, the maze. Perhaps you come from or have visited parts of the country where there are corn mazes. I hear that Reverend Tom shared about mazes and corn mazes in particular a couple of years ago, so he may know of what I speak. I am personally scared of corn mazes. I've been in them a couple of times. I start out feeling pretty confident, and then in just a little bit, a few steps, I find myself lost amidst the corn, which is really quite a bit taller than I am. I try to remind myself that corn mazes are created for the amusement of children, and it is unlikely that I would be left to die in the midst of a corn maze. But I'm never quite sure. Life feels like that sometimes. Alone and lost in the midst of a maze. Someone told me once about an exhibit that they went to at the National Building Museum, which is a fabulous museum in Washington, D.C., dedicated to architecture and home and place. Every summer, the museum puts in a huge installation in its lobby, a giant beach or a whole swimming pool of those plastic balls. Well, one year they built a maze You started on the outside, went in a little door, and just like all the mazes I have been in, you had to wonder and wander your way through, unclear which way to go. You couldn't see, of course, beyond the walls in front of you. But in this particular maze, as you made your way closer into the center, the walls got lower and lower and lower, until as you stood in the very center of the maze, you could look around and see spread out before you the whole of the maze, all of the pathways, the wrong turns and the dead ends, and also the clear way out. I love the idea that sometimes what life asks us to do is to go deep into the center of the maze, that we may not be able to see the way out of whatever morass and confusion we find ourselves in until we have centered down entirely. And often, as Judith shared with us this morning, we need a thread from someone helping us to get there. A companion on our journey through the maze, a trail of breadcrumbs from our sibling traveling through the woods with us, a way to know that we will get out eventually. Well, if life shows up around us in the universe and in the microcosms like spirals, and if sometimes it feels like a maze, scary and stuck, a labyrinth is, I think, the meaning we make of life. Labyrinths are created by humans, and indeed they have been created over millennia. Judith reminded us of the famous labyrinth of King Minos, built to contain the monster Minotaur. Sadly, not there when you visited. I do share your disappointment in that moment. Wouldn't that have been wonderful? Labyrinths actually have been built all over the world. In North and South America, in Australia and Nepal. In Scandinavia, there are coastal labyrinths built to trap trolls and bad winds. And all over the United Kingdom, you can find what are called turf mazes. The kind of labyrinths that we might often have in our minds, the sort that are most often used in Western culture for spiritual growth or inward looking, are unicursal labyrinths. That's the kind, just as Judith said, that has one way in and then that same way out. The floor of Chartres, the cathedrals in the 12th through the 14th century in Europe, they have built in those unicursal labyrinths. Perhaps you have walked a labyrinth. You know that as you go in, the labyrinth turns around and around, so that just like life, you're never quite sure how close you are to the center. It doubles back and turns around again until finally you find yourself abruptly in the middle. And then you turn and go back out again. There are a number of spiritual renewal activities around labyrinths and mythologies that surround them too. In Ireland, there is a belief that if you come into a labyrinth holding a wish for transformation, you may find yourself transformed, coming out that same path, a totally different being. Someone told me once that they were taught to walk a labyrinth holding a question in their mind. And that as they walked in and came to the center, they should stay in the center of that labyrinth until they knew the answer. Now, I will tell you that times I have tried that, bringing in a question with me that I did not know the answer to, I might still be in the middle of the labyrinth had I waited truly until the answer arrived to me. But I also know that I have found centering in that walking of labyrinths. My favorite way to walk a labyrinth is with other people. Not too many. You don't want to feel crowded and smushed up. But if just a few of you are there, beginning your labyrinth a minute or two after the other, then as you walk along the paths, you will find that you pass your companions on their own journeys. When you come into the center and start out again, you'll pass them on the path itself as they go in and you go out. Never sure which one of you is closest to the center at any given time. That feels like life too. The way that we pass along beside people, sometimes moving with them for whole lifetimes, sometimes merely passing them, but finding that our journey is affected by theirs. Labyrinths too invite a kind of trust. Some people I know have walked labyrinths wearing hoods so that all they can see are their feet in front of them, trusting that the path will lead them to the center and back out again. Some of the hardest stories in my own life, and the ones that people have been generous to share with me about theirs, are stories of loss and heartbreak and grief, where they realized that the only way out was through, was in, really, was centering down to the core of it so that they might then be fully freed. Spirals, mazes, labyrinths. Each one of them a different way to see the journeys on our lives, the transformations that we find. I wonder this morning, in this strange world we find ourselves in, whether life feels to you like a spiral, whether you are back again at something you thought you had already learned, another chance to do it differently this time. Or whether you are feeling stuck, looking around for the thread you can grasp onto to help you see your way out. Or perhaps whether you are simply following the path in front of you. None of us sure whether we are at the beginning or the middle or the end of this particular part of our journey, but grateful for the companions we pass along the way. Every life has a beginning and a middle and an end. If we are lucky, it is never a straight line.
I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open. I know, 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 I know. I know, 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 I know this rose will open. I know my fear. I know my fear. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose. I know this rose. I know this rose.
When Thomas Rideout invites us to remember this rose will open. Whatever rose that is for you, may it indeed open this week, this month, this year. May we travel together on the journey.